Hello and welcome to York Observatory's weekly Teletube broadcast, the online astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. We are broadcasting live from the Alan I. Carswell Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. York YouTube broadcasts every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. local Toronto time. For any questions or comments you have of our past shows, or if you have suggestions for future topics, please send us an email at observe@yorku.ca. You can always connect with us on Twitter or Instagram with the handle @York Observatory and Facebook at Alan I. Carswell Obs. I'm Maheen, and I'll be one of your hosts this evening along with Matt, Arfa, Nathan, and Sergiy. Tonight, we've got our very own Professor Paul Delaney joining us as a guest, whom we will introduce in a bit. He will be talking all about Return to the Moon. We do have live viewing tonight, so stay tuned. The observatory at York campus is in Toronto, and we would like to acknowledge the traditional land that our telescope is on. The observatory acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Our stargazing and astronomical efforts are but the latest in a very long history of astronomy in this area. Before we get started with our main show, we want to give you a little update on some sky objects you can see this coming week. Tonight, we have C76, which is an open cluster, Antares, M31, and Jupiter visible. Andromeda, which is a barred spiral galaxy, is approximately 2.5 million light years from Earth and is the brightest external galaxy you can see. It looks like a fuzzy patch when seen with the unaided eye. C76, that is Caldwell 76, has a magnitude of 2.56 and is located in the southern sky half a degree north of Zeta Scorpii. Jupiter will be visible right after sunset and will have enhanced visibility later during the night. Antares, which is a double star with a magnitude of 0.97, is distinctly reddish when viewed with naked eye, and the brightest object in the constellation of Scorpius. Another thing to have a look at tonight is the waning moon close to M35 pre-dawn. On September 5th, you can also have a look at the duo where Venus will gleam above the brightest star in Virgo, Spica, after sunset, which will be after sunset that day. Moon is currently in a waning crescent phase with an illumination of only 29.4%. I will now hand it over to our observing crew, June and Obada, to show us some live images from the wind meter. So right now we are looking at Venus. Looks like we have a very good image coming through. So while we're looking at the images, we will share some fun facts about what we're looking at. So I'm going to start us off with sharing a Venus fun fact. So Venus is actually hotter than Mercury despite being farther away from the sun. And the reason to that is the excess carbon dioxide, which is in its atmosphere, which results in heat trapping and greenhouse effect, a similar phenomenon which is seen on Earth. So this results in excessive heat trapping and therefore a higher temperature than anticipated based onto its position in the solar system. So does anyone have a good Venus fact to share in?
But
yes, I'll just chime in here. This is Professor Hyde in the background. So our host Maheen is getting a little bit of audio lag. So what we'll do is we'll sort of take turns. Professor Delaney, why don't you get us back to Venus, and Matt, you chime in right after he's done.
okay, thank you very much, Elena. So the image on the screen, which is a really nice image, is showing Venus to not be circular. When everybody looks at planets Mars and Jupiter through telescopes, they always see a nice circular image. but Venus is closer into the sun than is the Earth, and it therefore goes through phases very much like our own moon goes through phases. Maheen said we're in a waxing crescent phase at the moment. Well, at this point in time, I think we are in a waxing gibbous phase for Venus. If you look carefully at it, it's a little more than half of Venus, but it's definitely not circular. And over the coming weeks, as we're continuing to observe Venus, we're going to see it change its appearance, change its shape. From our perspective, the amount of illumination is going to change just like our own moon changes the amount of illumination we see from Earth during its phasing cycle over the course of a month. Really neat, great example of a bit of geometry in our solar system. And this was first spotted by Galileo in the early 17th century.
Indeed. And Matt, I believe you also had some fun Venus facts.
Yeah, I just had the one fact here. It's like an interesting topic to start a conversation, and well, I've mentioned it before, but Venus has actually its day. A day on Venus is longer than a year. In other words, for me, as I would say it, it's like a Monday on Earth. But to be honest, it would depend on the person, right? For some people, it would be like a never-ending Monday, and for other people, it would be like a never-ending Friday. So it depends on you. But that's for me, that's pretty interesting. I cannot imagine one single day being longer than an actual year.
I think I'd rather have an infinite Friday than a Monday, but that's just me. That's a wonderful fact. And we actually have some initial comments coming in from YouTube about Venus's spin as well, which is a really fun one because Venus does spin in the opposite direction as the Earth and most of the rest of the planets. It spins in the same direction, I believe, as Uranus. But very, very, very slowly. So a day on Venus takes 117 Earth days, or about a Venusian year, I believe. So it is a very, very slow and odd place, perhaps even caused as a collision in its past. And this rotating in the opposite direction is also called retrograde rotation, which I believe was called out by Elijah over on YouTube. So great crossover. And Arfa, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Dr. Hyde. So I actually have one very interesting fact about Venus, that is that it has 90 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth. So I don't think so. I want to be there, or neither does someone else. And one weird fact that I don't get for about Venus, because Venus is called the Earth's evil twin sister, but it was named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. So I find it interesting.
Absolutely, and it is a beautiful shining color, as you can see here. Some of the color coming through is real. This is the eyepiece cam over on the 1 meter telescope, bringing through a roughly true to life color image. This is what you would see if you were able to go over and look through the eyepiece on the 1 meter telescope now. Now let me just see if I can get our 1 meter technicians. We have June and Obada. Can you zoom in on the planet Venus just a little bit here? And we'll see if we can bring that out for you all. But you see that it's a little bit blurry and jumping around. That's mostly due to our atmosphere. But this lovely shining bright color of Venus, sort of a brilliant whitish with a little bit of yellow in there, has been noted by people before. And it was just so pretty out there in the evening sky. And you might have even seen it tonight if you were watching carefully. All right, so Maheen, do we have you back?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about the audio issues. I couldn't hear anyone, and that's why we had that lag.
I'm glad to have you back. So you were just talking about Venus. Did you have any other fun Venus facts?
Yeah, I actually do have a more scientific one. So it's that Venus has 90 times the atmospheric pressure of Earth. So that's about the same as the pressure at a depth of 1 kilometer in Earth's ocean. So that seems like a lot of atmospheric pressure, it seems like we could not live on Venus for long. I'm saying not even for a bit. We'd probably just crumble.
We would in fact crumble or get squished or vaporized or melted, maybe even all at once. I heard, and I think it's about right, if you were on Venus, you would be compressed down to roughly the size of a tuna fish can, and not a large tuna fish can. Now we're in communication with the 1 meter telescope. We have a few more objects we can get to. So let's go ahead and see what else we can see tonight on the 1 meter telescope. Polaris is a wonderful target. It should just be visible through the fading sunlight here. And of course, it is the North Star. And as they're moving across on the telescope now, you can just see a little bit of the control screen blinking back and forth. Now we're going to go ahead and have the 1 meter telescope move over, and as an adieu to Venus, I will just note in regards to our talk tonight, Venus also does not have a moon like Earth does. All right, so it looks like the 1 meter telescope is moving. We're just going to have to get them to shift around the dome so that the dome doesn't block our view. And we'll start getting ready for our fun facts about the star Polaris. So does anybody else want to chime in before I start talking about the wonderful North Star?
Yeah.
Arfa, go ahead.
So one fact I really find it interesting is that it is 2,500 times brighter than the sun, and it's actually at a distance 430 light years. And given the distance, it's still very bright. It's 1.97 magnitude over there. And it's actually part of a trinary system. So it has additions of smaller and larger stars, for example, Polaris A, the dwarf AB, which orbits around each other. So this one is actually a very interesting system of stars.
Indeed, it is. And if we can get the, while the 1 meter is going into Polaris here, they're going to try to bring up the light level on Polaris so that it shines a bit brighter. And if we can get them to zoom in a bit on the star, we may even actually be able to see the separation in the binary. While that's going, I believe, Paul, I saw you had some interesting Polaris thoughts.
Yeah, I just thought I would chime in and remind people that we're in a very lucky time era because, of course, Polaris, we're calling it the North Star, but it's only very temporarily the North Star because of the precession of the Earth's axis, a 26,000-year cycle through various constellations. We're lucky to have Polaris at the moment very close to where the North polar axis of the Earth is pointing. If you wait a couple of thousand years, it's not going to be there. In fact, I think it's about 13,000 years from now, we're going to be much closer to the star Vega for our North Star. So enjoy it while you can, folks.
Indeed, and it has actually been very enjoyable and very useful for navigation. In our recent history, of course, we're familiar with the old-fashioned sailing ships and people using compasses to navigate towards north, but they were also using the stars. And in the Northern Hemisphere, we would use Polaris and perhaps even the rest of the stars in the Dipper to orient ourselves to north. So if you were walking in the woods and you got lost, you could at least find your way north again. If we were to go in the Southern Hemisphere, we would actually have to use an entirely different set of stars called the Southern Cross. And this is actually quite fun. So you don't need a giant telescope to see Polaris on a clear night. So because the skies are clear, if you do happen to wander outside, have a look up and see if you can find your way north. All right, now let's see if we can get a little bit of tweaking on the adjustment here, and we're just going to zoom in a little bit farther on the star. And while we head into Polaris, as I say, if we're lucky, we might be able to bring out just a smidge of that binary nature. Now we are getting a little bit of interference over on the 1 meter because the sun has not completely set. I think the sun's set right now official is around 8:15, maybe even 8:30. If you just squint a little bit, you might be able to imagine, you can see that this is more than one star. All
Seems
right.
like Arfa has a fact to share with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So most people probably will know that Polaris is or was known as the North Star, but this is not going to be the North Star forever. So right now, since its axis and then everything is spinning and orbiting, so one day Polaris no longer will be the North Star, but due to its massive size, it will take about 26,000 years to complete one axis spin. So Polaris is currently on a 26,000 year reign of the North Star title.
That is actually very fun. It does go and between your explanation and Paul's, that was you get an impression that these things change over time, and in fact that is totally correct. The Earth's axis has a little bit of a wobble to it, and so where we are pointed for our direct north with the planet Earth changes a little bit over time, and that sort of little bit of a wobble to our axis is not something that we generally see during one human's lifetime, but over many, many years, tens of thousands of years, we do see things like a shift in which star is pointed due north and which star is pointed due south. Arfa, did we catch your fun fact already?
Yep.
All right. Any other last calls for the wonderful star system of Polaris?
I just wanted to mention that it's really nice that we do have pole stars to help us kind of navigate the entire sky. So that's really convenient to just know that one star is going to stay fixed at a place, and then we can kind of use that to find other objects.
Absolutely. If you did have to align your telescope, having a telescope that was aligned north would mean that you would only have to track the direction that the Earth rotates to keep a hold of a star throughout the night. And this is, you've actually hit on the origin of what's known as an RA deck sort of telescope, where they do exactly this. They sort of point the telescope axis to the north, and they just rotate the telescope around so that it follows the stars east to west as they move across the sky. It means you only have to move in one direction. Now, I believe we have one more target we're going to try to hit right now. And I think we're going to have the 1 meter telescope try for another fabulous star system. 1 meter telescope on its way to Albireo. And this is a great one to look for if you are interested in binary stars in particular. You can see that they've pulled up the control screen. What you see in the background there is, of course, the plane wave interface that we use to control the 1 meter telescope. And they'll have to go out and move the dome for us again. And then we should be able to see, and I'm not quite sure if it's Albireo or Albireo. Does anyone here have a preference?
Tomato, tomato.
Potato, potato. Yes, Albireo, Albireo. It is a double star, and what we can see with this double star, as soon as we're able to get the dome rotated around and the star coming in. Now, having a binary star in space is not so unusual. Having a binary star where you can actually see and resolve the two stars, now that's unusual. You all saw just now how difficult it was to see the companions of Polaris. Well, you can see two beautiful blue stars here They actually look completely fabulous already, and we haven't even finished adjusting it for you. So everyone should be able to see some great 2 stars with some different colors as our crew starts to get oriented here. We should be able to zoom in a little bit as well.
Of course, double stars, multiple star systems, not nearly as uncommon as some people might think. Fully 35%, maybe as many as 40% of all of the stars that you see in the night sky are in fact multiple stars. It's just you can't resolve them with the naked eye. In fact, with a lot of telescopes, you still can't resolve them. But nearly 4 stars in every 10 that you look at in the night sky are in fact double or more multiple star systems.
Indeed, and the fact that we cannot resolve them is simply due to the fact that they're so far away for the most part. All right, Alberio, anyone else have some fun Alberio facts if you like your binary stars? Of course, we mentioned the colors. Can anyone see which 2 colors we've got here?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So basically, the brighter gold star is actually Alberio A, and it is about 430 light years away, and Alberio B, which is the dimmer blue star, which I believe is the upper one in this angle of the telescope, and it is around 400 light years distant. However, it is not yet clear because of how distantly spaced they are, that if they are actually gravitationally bound, just like Professor Hyde just mentioned.
Indeed, they are, and it's being far apart and bright makes them easy to distinguish. And even if you've got a small telescope, you can usually pick out the 2 different colors. Of course, these different colors mean that these are actually very different stars. They have what's called a different spectral type. They burn at different temperatures, if you will. The bluer star, star tends to be, the hotter it tends to be. And if you have learned the spectrotypes, I believe one's a K star and one's a B star. So you've got oh boy, an F grade kills me, which is how I tell all of my students to remember it. So the O stars are the bluer and the brighter stars, and the K and the M stars are the dimmer and the redder stars. So the redder star being a dimmer, cooler star generally would mean that it is a longer lived star. And the blue star being a brighter, hotter star would be, something that will burn out relatively quickly. So it might be very interesting at the end of this blue star's life, what happens to the red star if it's affected at all at the large distance that it's in. So very fun, very, very fun binary pair, and something you can see and resolve through most medium-sized telescopes, I would say. Maybe not binoculars. All right, any other last thoughts on Alberio?
I just say it seems like a big mystery to solve. I hope we can solve it one day.
Excellent.
Whether it is, yeah.
Absolutely. And I noticed, Sergiy, you've actually got a suggestion for the International Phonetic Alphabet on the pronunciation. Is that something that you are able to let us know how to say, or do you look that up?
Yeah, I looked it up. That's the pronunciation in the International Phonetic Alphabet. I might get this wrong, but I believe it's Alberio. I'm not sure exactly where the stress is, but that's lowercase capital I is an sound, and the capital I is the lowercase I with the dot is an E sound. Alberio.
That is a wonderful, wonderful tip. All right, I think it's about time to head on back over to the main show for a little bit. If we have time at the end, we will definitely hit a few more live targets with the 1 meter. Maheen, can you grab that screen? And over to you, Matt, for the speaker introduction.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to our observers for great live imaging. And we might catch some after the show as well as if the weather permits. And well, it is with great honor that I'm able to present the guest speaker of this evening, Professor Paul Delaney. You may know Professor Delaney as the former director of the Alan I. Carswell Observatory, but let's get in a little bit of more detail into what Professor Delaney has achieved over the years. First of all, did you know that Professor Delaney's Bachelor of Science back in Australia was in experimental physics? Well, I didn't, and it was quite the fun fact. And moreover, he came to Canada to do his master's degree in astronomy, this time at the University of Victoria. And later on, Professor Delaney worked as a nuclear physicist, which is really amazing, by the way, for Atomic Energy of Canada, and as a support astronomer at McGraw-Hill Observatory in Tucson, Arizona. Since 1986, Professor Delaney has been a member of the Department of Physics and Astronomy at York University, where he has acted as full-time professor, as director, as chair, and even as master of the Bethune College, receiving teaching awards, as well as awards for outstanding contributions to the public understanding of science among Canadians. And Professor Delaney is all that and much more. He's an inspiration to us all here at the Alan I. Carswell Observatory, and we're glad to have you here, Professor.
Now I must turn on my microphone so that you can hear me. Thank you very much, Matt, for that introduction. Delighted to be here. And let's face it, talking about the moon, it's definitely one of my favorite objects. I mean, Elena loves to talk about Mars. I love to talk about the moon. Okay, let me go ahead and wrestle the control away from you so I can bring up my slide deck. Okay, and I'll bring on my video there as well. Oh, let's bring that up a little bit more. Oh, sorry, a little bit of detail here. Okay, so let's go ahead and find my slide deck. And where are we here? Oh, okay. Okay. Oops. Nope. Oh, I'm on the wrong part. Hang on. Okay, screen sharing has stopped. All right, let's try that again, shall we? Sorry about this. Okay, there we go. Now, okay, I'm assuming you can now see my opening slide, which says return to the moon, Apollo to Artemis. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Excellent. All right. All right. So sorry for that technical fumble there. So, when we think about it, we've often read the statistics that indicate that we've not been to the moon with humans since 1972, since the era of Apollo. But that is likely to change within the next 3 to 4 years. So it seemed fairly appropriate to perhaps, bring together a little bit of history, because I lived through the Apollo era. I know that makes me ancient, but that's okay. And hopefully I'm going to see all the excitement associated with Artemis, so I can sort of bring together what it was like in the past and what I'm expecting for us to see in the future. Little piece of history, though, let me just sort of recap just a touch. The space age started on October 4th, 1957, long before we got to the moon. And it started with the Soviet Union's launch of a small spacecraft called Sputnik 1. You can see the image here. It wasn't a very sophisticated spacecraft. It really just had a radio transmitter on board. But the important point was that the Soviet Union was able, on behalf of humanity, to put something in Earth orbit. And it opened up the era of the space age. And let's face it, since that point in time, thousands of satellites have gone into orbit. More to the point, you and I live our daily lives as a result of our interconnectivity with near-Earth orbit, with geostationary orbit, with satellites that orbit our planet. It all started October 4th, 1957. The United States, courtesy of NASA, followed suit with a much lighter spacecraft, but it had greater scientific capability with the launch of Explorer 1, January 31st, 1958. And this vehicle actually found the Van Allen radiation belts. We didn't even know we had radiation belts circling our planet until this spacecraft began its journey into space. As you can see, only lasted 3.5 months, but it showed the importance of scientific investigation of, at this point in time, the near-Earth environment. And of course, it wasn't very long before we stretched our wings, so as to speak, and began to explore farther from our planet. The first human being into space was Yuri Gagarin, April 12, 1961. He only orbited the Earth for one circuit. In fact, didn't quite make one exact circuit, but that's splitting hairs. He orbited the Earth, and that was the important point. He survived. He lived to tell the tale, because we weren't even sure how humans were going to react to the weightless, or at least the microgravity environment. Well, he had a ball. He had a great time up there. There was no question in the world that humans were going to be able to survive in space. And so the technical challenges associated with literally strapping a human being onto so much energy, basically a controlled bomb, we were taking that step into the high frontier. And that was 1961. That was literally 60 years ago. NASA and John Glenn followed on February 20th, 1962, Friendship 7. Glenn orbited for 3 circuits of the Earth, came down again. And if you will, this really marked the engagement of the space race. President Kennedy had indicated the previous May of 1961, that the United States, courtesy of NASA, wanted to put a human being on the moon by the end of the decade, by the end of the 1960s. He made that declaration, and NASA hadn't put a human being into Earth orbit yet. They had flown suborbital flights, Alan Shepard and so on, but the race was on between the Soviet Union and the United States to put somebody on the moon by the end of the 1960s. So here we are, 1962, Project Mercury, working our way towards putting humans on the moon within 8 years. It was a huge technological undertaking for NASA, and both the Soviet Union and the United States were very, very keen to develop their space technology. The first women in space, in the case of the Soviet Union, was Valerantina Tereshkova, 1963. So she followed the men into space in a very short time frame. The United States, NASA, they sort of lagged behind a little bit. Sally Ride did not fly into space until June of 1983, and she flew Space Shuttle. And of course, since that point in time, the number of women who have flown into space has steadily grown, and most missions now have at least one, if not more women associated with those flights. So a little bit of equality has begun to creep into astronaut selection. The first walks in space, again, remember the 60s were characterized by this space race. Alexei Leonov flew in 1965, and Ed White, associated with Gemini, was flown in 1965 as well. You can see that at this point in time, though the two space powers, if you will, because really nobody else was seriously engaged in the space frontier. Canada had launched a satellite into orbit by this era. The United Kingdom were flying satellites on US rockets and so on. But really, it was the Soviet Union and the United States that were vying for space supremacy, if you will, in determining whether or not they could take those steps that would get people to the moon by the end of the decade. Well, without going into all of the details, that was just a terribly quick glossary. It did end up that by the end of the decade, 1969, July to be specific, Apollo 11 was actually successful in landing people on the moon. There were in all 6 Apollo missions that successfully landed people on the moon. The architecture that got us to put Apollo on the moon was one very much like a pyramid. The base was laid with Project Mercury, John Glenn and company. It was then improved upon, or grown higher, if you will, with Project Gemini. We went from one person in the capsule to two people in the capsule. And then we moved away from Earth orbit and we flew reconnaissance to the moon. And that was Apollo. Apollo was designed as the moon rocket and still remains to be one of the most powerful rockets that have ever been created. Now with the Super Heavy of SpaceX, it no longer holds the record for being the most powerful vehicle, but Super Heavy is only flown twice, and it's only flown with satellites into orbit. The Apollo moon rocket flew successfully every single time it flew, and it took, as I said, 18 people to the moon successfully, 12 of them onto the lunar surface. So the Saturn V, which you can see pictured here, really was quite a unique vehicle. As I said, Apollo was designed from the outset to go to the moon. It was a three-staged rocket that took people and equipment from Earth orbit to the moon. It's a 3-day trip. They remained in lunar orbit for, depending on what the mission was, a day or a few days, and then they blasted out of lunar orbit and came back to Earth for a splashdown here back on the Earth. That was conceived in the early 1960s and was successfully executed for the first time to the moon with Apollo 8 in December of 68, and then with the manned missions, the crewed missions, starting in 1969. Just to remind you what it looks like out there in space, this is the Earth-Moon system. This is our home. This is our neighborhood. And you can see that the Earth and the moon look very different. A very quickie snapshot there on the right, which was taken by the Galileo spacecraft as it headed out to Jupiter, revealed the cloud-covered, water-covered surface of our planet, and the moon obviously devoid of those types of features. It's an airless void on the moon. It's a harsh environment, meaning, of course, that the astronauts who were going to investigate the lunar surface had to be suitably protected. Just as a side note, the image on the left of the Earth-Moon system was actually taken from Mars orbit. It was taken by one of the Mars satellites looking back towards the Earth. This is the Mars Reconnaissance Observer looking back towards the Earth. That's the Earth-Moon system as seen from Mars. Couple of quick images. Again, we don't have time to talk about all of the exploits of Project Apollo back there in the 1969 to 1972 era, but I can tell you that it was exciting to watch the progress from the early 60s to the late 60s, the ability to develop ever more sophisticated spacecraft, to be able to see the achievements of docking in orbit, to being able to go to the moon, to be able to land on the moon. It captivated people around the world. I was living in Australia at that point in time, but the exploits, particularly of Project Apollo towards the end of the 1960s decade, filled our newspaper, not quite front to back, but it certainly displaced almost everything else. It was that palpable in the excitement that it conveyed to people. And this was long before the internet. The television and the newspapers were our only real source of information as far as the space programs were concerned. I also must add that it was a dangerous time all through the 60s. There were astronauts and cosmonauts who lost their lives in our undertaking to get to the moon, to be able to master low Earth orbit, to be able to, if you will, conquer those early moments of space travel. The Apollo 1 astronauts who died in January of 1967, the cosmonaut who died in 1968 as he returned to Earth. These are, terribly unfortunate incidents, but the astronauts themselves, when asked whether or not they were prepared to accept the dangers associated with spaceflight, all said in unison, it is where we need to be able to conquer the space environment was something that they were passionate about. And as I say, with respect to landing on the moon, were very, very successful. Images on the left represent Apollo 11. The image on the right is Apollo 12. You can see the very bulky spacesuits. They were able to wander around the lunar surface, 1/6 gravity, very, very happily. Between the 6 missions, they brought back something like 400 kilograms of moon rock. And that represents by far the greatest treasures of the Apollo era, and has allowed us to analyze the moon continuously from this point in time, 1969, right through to the current moments in time. So those 12 astronauts, one of whom was a geologist, Harrison Schmitt, who flew on Apollo 17, they did a great service to science in being able to help us understand how our nearest neighbor in space is operating, literally. The Soviet Union did not win the space race. They did not win the race to the moon, but nobody should think that they failed either. I mean, they conquered many, many problems, just as the United States did, and they were successful in sending robotic explorers to the moon, Lunokhod, that actually picked up samples of moon rock and brought them back to Earth. The Lunokhod 2 mission, in fact, roved around the moon's surface for in excess of 30 kilometers. Now, remember, this is back in 1971 or thereabouts, 71 or 72. Can't quite remember the exact date for Lunokhod 2. And that record held until the Opportunity rover on Mars surpassed it in and around 2015. So the technology required to get robots onto the moon, to run around the moon's surface and then bring back samples, really, really good technology. So don't think of the activities associated with the Soviet Union as failures, but if you will, by the definition of a race to the moon, they did not put any human beings on the moon. NASA did. Political commentary here, as far as I'm concerned, unfortunately, the space powers, Soviet Union and the United States, abandoned the moon. They got to the Apollo era, they successfully landed on the moon, and they concluded after 6 missions to the moon's surface that we knew everything we needed to know about the moon and we didn't need to do it ever again. And so Project Apollo was canceled early. There were meant to be 20 Apollo missions. There were meant to be follow-ups, but we got to Apollo 17 and that was canceled. And the space powers turned their attention to low Earth orbit. The launching of Skylab in 73, 6 Salyut space stations from the late 70s into the mid 80s, the Mir space station, Salyut and Mir were both Soviet space stations, although I guess Mir became a Russian space station. Skylab, of course, was NASA. And then, of course, the collaborative effort to build the International Space Station, the ISS. Space stations became the order of the day, as well as robotic exploration of the solar system. But as far as humans were concerned, we were now trapped in low Earth orbit. The Space Shuttle era from 1981 to 2011 saw 135 missions, but all to low Earth orbit. You know, the Space Shuttle, a fabulous vehicle, but it really was a glorified truck. It delivered materials to low Earth orbit, satellites as well, and it certainly was instrumental in building the ISS. But the idea of spreading our wings, going back to the moon and beyond, that was off the table for literally the better part of 40 years after the last Apollo mission. So remember, Apollo 17 left the moon in 1972. Since then, of course, particularly in the 21st century, there have been many commercial space companies that have blossomed. And, you know, just to name perhaps the 2 most well-known, SpaceX and Blue Origin, but there are many, many more that are now delivering materials to not only low Earth orbit, but also to the moon. Nobody in the commercial venture has launched a payload to Mars or to any of the other planets in the solar system. I am not counting Elon Musk's car going towards Mars as being a payload. But you know, when we look at all of the differing commercial ventures, they have allowed NASA a great deal of flexibility to go to the planets and go to the planets well. Their exploration of the surface of Mars, the vehicles that have gone into orbit around Jupiter, the exploration of our own sun, and so on. NASA has done wonderful things with respect to science. But with respect to going back to the moon, it remained off the table until 2017. And then NASA was basically given a renewed mandate, Project Artemis. And Project Artemis, Artemis being the mythological sister to Apollo, Project Artemis was basically charged with returning to the moon and putting the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024. A fairly ambitious timeline, 7 years, to pick up the pieces associated with the rocket technology that will be needed to take people back to the moon, because in large measure, NASA had lost that ability to take significant payloads to the moon and had bequeathed that activity to groups like SpaceX. However, with Project Artemis, the race was back on, at least internally, if you will, to be able to generate the necessary technology that would take humans successfully back to the moon. And this time, not just as a stop and go type activity, but rather to go there and create a permanent settlement. Initially, obviously, a scientific base that would allow us to spend significant amounts of time successfully and safely on the moon's surface, and presumably after that initial settlement, a larger, call it if you will, a colony, call it what you like, as far as a larger human presence. It's also important to note that Project Artemis differs very significantly from Project Apollo. Artemis has international collaboration at a significant level. Back in the 60s, Project Apollo very much was a United States NASA endeavor to win the race to the moon, as was charged to them by President Kennedy. It was very much a US versus Soviet type engagement. And of course, very few other countries had developed any type of space hardware or had been able to deliver space material into space. Project Artemis is very different. There is significant international collaboration. There is significant commercial engagement, groups like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and so on. And the hardware is not just the only aspect of international collaboration, but so too are the astronauts that will potentially fly with Artemis. There will be, for example, as you will see in a moment, a Canadian that will fly to the moon in 2023. The blueprint of the International Space Station's cooperation amongst nations has leaked over into the Artemis Accords. And while the Artemis Accords are arguably not complete and certainly not all-encompassing, they do lay out a foundation upon which nations can collaborate and go to the moon as a human race rather than as an individual nation. So Artemis has great promise in this regard. The Space Launch System of NASA is the foundation, the vehicle upon which humans will be able to return to the moon. Certainly the SLS will be the most powerful vehicle NASA has created since the Saturn V back in the 60s. Very different architecture. It lends itself much more to Space Shuttle configurations. You can see the solid rocket boosters strapped to the side. That central core is basically filled with liquid fuel that will be utilized by the shuttle engines, which are at the base of the Artemis Prime stage. Near the top, of course, the interstage area, that's where they will be carrying other payloads, scientific satellites, and so on. And at the very top is the Orion spacecraft, which is where humans will reside as they go to and from the moon. This is what that Orion crew module looks like. Again, it looks very much like the Apollo era. In fact, some people have referred to it as the Apollo command module on steroids. It's wider, it's larger, it's more spacious, and it is attached to sort of like a service module area. which will have cargo and propulsion elements. And of course, you can see the solar panels that are there to deliver significant amounts of power to the entire configuration. The Apollo capsule really was very tiny. They were only men who flew in Apollo. So the 3 men who were in the Apollo capsule lay on couches side by side, and literally, that was the entire diameter of the Apollo capsule. It really was very tight. By comparison, the Orion module will carry 4 people, considerably more luxuriously, sort of more in keeping with the Dragon capsule of SpaceX. So it is similar but different to the Apollo command module, and Orion has already flown. It flew in 2014 for its first test, so in many ways it's ready to go once the SLS is ready to fly. And when will all that happen? Really, really soon. The Artemis 1 mission is proposed to be launched later this year, literally, if they hold to their timeline, don't hold your breath on that, the next 3 months. I think that timeline will probably slip a touch, but it is imminent, the launch of Artemis 1. It is a fully integrated SLS and Orion mission. That is to say, put all of the elements together, launch it, and fly it to the moon. It is uncrewed. And that, of course, is in keeping with, if you will, previous Apollo-type missions. The first couple of Apollos were uncrewed missions as well, to make sure that the hardware was fully operable. Well, that's what we're going to see with Artemis 1 as well. It will fly to the moon, hopefully in November of this year. It will circle the moon. That is to say, it will break into lunar orbit. It will circle the moon. It will then break out of lunar orbit and come all the way back. It will be the farthest spacecraft that is capable of carrying humans ever to be launched. And the entire mission elapsed time should be of order 3 weeks. So they'll spend a bit of time in Earth orbit. They will spend a bit of time going to the moon. They'll spend a bit of time in lunar orbit, all designed to test thoroughly the systems associated with Artemis. Here is what it will look like. I won't go through it, but as you can see, it leaves Earth, wanders across to the moon, hangs out to the moon for a while, and then comes back home. That hopefully will happen later this year. Assuming it's successful, Artemis 2 will launch in 2023. And again, it will be a fully integrated SLS and Orion system, but this time it will be carrying people. 4 crew are likely to fly. 1 of those crew members will be a Canadian. It'll be an entire dress rehearsal for the landing on the moon, which will be the Artemis 3 endeavor. Artemis 2 will not land. It'll go to the moon. It'll hang out there briefly, and then it will return for a total mission elapsed time of only about 10 days. And if successful, it will, as expected, it will be the farthest into space any humans have flown, because the orbit will take them several thousand kilometers beyond the moon before they return to Earth. So Artemis 2 will be the first flight of humans to the moon since 1972, and the Canadian will be on board. This is the Artemis 2 flight plan. As you can see, time in Earth orbit, out to the moon. The orbital trajectory will take them around the moon. They will not orbit the moon per se, or at least that is the current plan. It will be what they refer to as a free return mission. And so it's again all designed to make sure that this vehicle is ready to take humans to the moon for landing. Artemis 3 is currently expected to fly in 2024. I don't think that will happen, but I do expect it to happen shortly thereafter. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was 2025. I think 2024 is just a slightly too tight a timeline. And that, of course, assumes that Artemis 1 and 2 are fully successful. The Artemis 3 Orion spacecraft will not land on the moon. The moon landing will be accomplished by commercial enterprises. And at the moment, despite legal challenges, SpaceX is charged with developing the landing vehicle, the Starship, which will take astronauts from the Orion module to the lunar surface. So Starship will go to the moon's orbit. Orion will transfer 2 crew members to the Starship, and land on the moon's surface. And then, of course, they'll spend some time there, and then they will come back home. That will be the first human landing since Apollo 17 in December of 1972. There is some talk that there might be a Canadian on that mission as well, although they will not be walking on the surface of the moon at that point in time. That's not clear at the moment what the makeup of that crew will be, other than the fact that the 2 astronauts that move into Starship and go to the moon's surface, certainly one will be a woman and the other will be a man. Artemis 4 and beyond represents our objective of staying at the moon. And to accomplish that staying will be a space station called Gateway. And Canada is involved in the development of Gateway. We will, you guessed it, be building a Canadarm to be on Gateway. Gateway will be presumably permanently inhabited. It will allow astronauts to go backwards and forwards to the moon's surface. It will be a, if you will, a way station for astronauts coming from Earth. They will dock with Gateway before they transfer down to the moon's surface. And of course, the crew coming up from the surface will take the Orion spacecraft and head back home with their scientific findings, their moon rocks, and so on. Gateway was originally expected to be built by 2024. That will not happen. It is probably more like 2026, 2027. And this is the current artist's concept of what Gateway will look like, a much scaled down version of the ISS, but definitely a way to facilitate activity from the moon's surface and back to the Earth. So there you have the opening gambit of Artemis, the first 3 missions that should be in rapid fire succession over the next 3 to 4 years. And if all goes according to plan, humanity will return to the moon's surface first time since 1972. Apollo to Artemis. I am really excited about Artemis. I was absolutely captivated watching Apollo, and I encourage you all to be equally excited about what is about to happen as far as human spaceflight is concerned. Okay, time for questions. Whoever is looking after this can wrestle back control of the screen if they so choose.
Thank you, Professor Delaney, for such an amazing talk. It was very interesting to hear all about the future of space exploration with regards to return to the moon. Now, since we have a good weather tonight and also some questions on the talk, I will let our observing crew grab the screen share for some more live imaging and move on to the questions as well. Go ahead with your question, Arfa.
Thank you, Maheen. Dr. Paul, I actually had a question, and it's actually, I don't know, it has been making me wonder for a long time. Do you think installation of a telescope or research center at Moon is possibility in the future?
Oh, absolutely. Whether or not it's going to happen very quickly in time for your PhD or not, I don't know. I probably not. But the idea of putting telescopes on the moon is something that we've spoken about as a community for a long time. It probably won't be, the first telescope on the moon probably won't be an optical telescope. The moon has got an awful lot of dust and it manages to get its way into everything. And so until we've defined or developed the technology that can keep a mirror nice and clean in the dusty environment of the moon, I suspect the first telescope we see on the moon will be a radio telescope, and it'll be on lunar far side. So on the far side of the moon, where the moon will literally shield that radio telescope from every human communication signal. And therefore the dark side, sorry, not the dark side, the far side of the moon will be radio dark from a radio telescope's perspective. So I fully expect the first telescope on the moon, first big research telescope on the moon, will be a radio telescope, and it'll be on lunar far side. But you can bet that once we are comfortable with establishing, a presence, a settlement on the moon's surface, an optical telescope looking out at the stars without the interference of an atmosphere, that will be a very high priority. But as I say, we've got to develop the technology that keeps that pesky dust away from the mirror and the electronics.
So on our way to the next question, I'll just let everyone know what the background star is. If you were to take the 1 meter telescope to the far side of the moon, it would be even better. But we are in Toronto and we've still managed a fabulous image of Herschel's Garnet Star. This star is also known as Arrakis, or if you want to look it up in the catalog, HD 206936. It's a red supergiant. So it's really sparkling and it's at the edge of the IC 1396 nebula. So while you're enjoying your questions and thinking about the moon, this will be your background image. So Maheen, you have some more questions coming the way for our speaker?
Yep, next up we have Sergiy.
Hello, Professor Delaney. I just had 2 questions. You can answer one, you can answer both. It's up to you. So my first question was, for the future inhabitants of Earth, what would be the most interesting and non-conventional future use of the moon that comes to mind? So how can we use the moon in a way that no one expects?
Oh, that's a goodie. I mean, there's lots of talk about mining the moon's resources, perhaps helium-3, bringing it back as a fuel source. In terms of, though, what we are not expecting, gosh, I'm looking forward to, as a Canadian, the first ice rink on the moon. There's lots of ice down there around the South Pole. I'm not sure whether that classifies as an unconventional use, but when all is said and done, I fully expect that there will be a great deal of space tourism associated with the moon. There'll be lots of science done trying to understand the moon's formation processes, because we still really don't understand exactly how the moon formed, and understanding how satellites are in fact created around their parent planets, very, very important. As I said, there will be some sort of lunar mining which will take place, but I'm rather looking forward to the idea of somebody spending a weekend on the moon. We all go to our favorite lakes in the summertime. We go skiing in the wintertime here on Earth. I fully expect there's going to be a big market for lunar tourism. And, just imagine watching the sunrise across the lunar landscape. Of course, 2 weeks of sunshine. I think that will be absolutely fabulous. So I don't really have a great answer for you, Sergey, as far as the most unconventional, but I certainly will expect to see some imaginative ideas come forward as our ability to stay safely on the moon's surface for longer periods of time, as that is cultivated.
A weekend at the moon with ice cream sure would be nice.
Yeah.
My second question is, what do you believe is the future of the Outer Space Treaty? What implications will its future have on the moon?
Oh, yeah. The Outer Space Treaty, for those who aren't aware, was put forward in 1967 by the United Nations to help govern the peaceful utilization of the space environment. Well, how peaceful it is, of course, is a debatable question at this point in time, but let's stay on the positive side of this. Going to the moon, going to the planets in our solar system definitely needs to be thought of as a collaborative venture of humanity. Unfortunately, of course, there are nation states here on the Earth, and that type of, shall I say, segregation and antagonism carries forth into the space environments. Why I like the ISS type blueprint, why I like the Artemis project blueprints. It tries to create a more collaborative environment, the use of space for all mankind, all humankind, and so on. The Outer Space Treaty was a great first cut at it, but let's face it, it's sort of 50 years old and counting. And in a society which is as litigious as we have, everybody wants to sue everybody else for every nickel and dime they can possibly get if they don't get their own way. So the Outer Space Treaty at some point soon is going to be tested in various courts. the International Space University is already examining from a legal perspective the differing aspects of space law. So while there hasn't been much of an update to the Outer Space Treaty, there has been a phenomenal amount of effort over the last 15 to 20 years looking at the legal questions associated with spaceflight. So we are going to see much, much more with respect to the legalization of space flight, space travel. I mean, already it's beginning just from the point of view of space tourism. You can bet that the folks who are flying space tourism flights are signing documents that are incredibly lengthy and densely written by lawyers to try and exempt the owners of those vehicles from any culpability in the event of an accident. You can imagine going to the moon if there is an incident there that is associated with a collaborative venture. There will be finger pointing. We've even seen finger pointing on the ISS, holes in the spacecraft, the Soyuz spacecraft. The Russians pointed at an American astronaut. Those sorts of frictions are going to increase, unfortunately. So the Outer Space Treaty, great first step, but it is a baby step, and we're going to see a ton of legislation passed by a variety of different countries. Whether or not the UN is going to be recognized as the arbiter of all of these new regulations remains to be seen. Countries do like their independence, but we are in for, I unfortunately suspect, a bit of a rocky road ahead as far as the legalization of spaceflight is concerned.
I can't wait to know more about the future of space law. Thank you, that was very enlightening. That answered all of my questions. Matt, do you have any questions for Professor Delaney?
Yes. So my question was, once we actually achieve to go back to the moon, what should we do there next, according to you?
Stay, literally. That's the quickie answer, stay. You can't understand an object by going to 6 differing parts of the moon surface, bringing back 400 kilograms of moon rock. I mean, it'd be like me asking you to characterize all aspects of the Earth by picking your 6 favorite spots, and then, I'll give you 400 kilograms of rock and you can analyze it. Would you expect to be able to understand the length and breadth, the history of our planet? And the answer, of course, is absolutely no. We've been examining our planet for hundreds of years, and we're very up close and personal with the planet. We can drill into it anytime we like, and we still are uncovering mysteries that we don't understand. So to be able to truly understand the origins and the behavior of the moon requires a continuous presence there. The moment we start sort of examining the lunar surface, I would expect that within the first month, we will have more questions than answers with respect to our analysis. Human beings are very, very inquisitive, and putting us on the moon with the capabilities of a science laboratory is going to accelerate the process of understanding that particular environment. And that is an environment that we need to be able to protect ourselves against. So just being on the surface is going to give us the experience and the understanding to be able to create the types of structures that we will utilize when we go to Mars, for example. Now, the International Space Station wasn't built by accident. It was built on the experience of Skylab, Salyut, Mir. That was over 25 years worth of space environmental history before we were able to successfully put together the ISS. And here we are, 20 years and counting. The ISS has been a phenomenal success as far as a science laboratory is concerned, but it's been an even bigger success in the ability for humans of differing nations to put together modules that have stood the test of time and have stood up to the space environment. You can't get that experience with 1 and 2 day trips anywhere. So once we get to the moon and we stay on the moon, we're going to be building our understanding and building our expertise to be able to live anywhere in our solar system. And I think, personally, that is the destiny of humanity, to be able to spread out throughout our solar system and eventually beyond our solar system. That will start with our first lunar settlement.
Thank you so much. And I don't know if there's time for one question more for me, so I'm just gonna make this a quick one. What are your thoughts on moving the Allen I Carswell Observatory to the far side of the moon for their visibility? And would you visit us frequently?
Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful? But it deprives so many people the opportunity to wander up to the telescope once the pandemic ends. We can't take everybody to the moon. I always wanted to take my first year astronomy class out on field trips to Hawaii or wherever, and it just never happened. So yes, it's very appealing to go to the far side of the moon with the Allen I Carswell Observatory, but to deprive too many people of too much joy.
Once we get the space taxis set up, Paul, I will go ahead and authorize shall I say, a more distant atrium, and we can have you up there.
Sounds a plan, Elena. Sounds a plan.
All right, Maheen, over to you.
Yep. So next up, we have a question from Nathan.
Yep, I have two questions. My first question is, do you think the abundance of helium-3 on the moon will trigger a new space race and maybe even cause a breakthrough in fusion energy?
I don't think it's going to cause a renewed space race. I think there is too much development of the helium-3 as a resource here on Earth that is needed at this point in time. And by the time we have sorted out that technology, I think all nations will have a lot of ready access to the moon. I would hope that we could bring back helium-3 for everybody to utilize. That's, again, the wishful thinking perhaps, but I really do believe that we can utilize the lessons learned here on Earth and perhaps be able to share the resources of the space environment in a more equitable fashion than we've shown the ability to do here on Earth. So no, I don't think it's going to trigger the space race. If we knew how to utilize helium-3 right now, maybe it would cause a space race. But no, I think that is unlikely. I think it's more likely that we're going to figure out collaboratively how to go to the moon on a regular basis, pick up that helium-3, bring it back here, and continue the development of that technology here on Earth.
I find that fascinating. I have one more question, a little bit more casual than the first one asked, and that is, what is your favorite theory on the moon's formation, since after all, we don't fully know the moon's origins yet?
Yeah, I've lived through a roller coaster of an affair as far as that is concerned. When we went to the moon in 1969, there were 3 theories that we thought would represent the formation of the moon, and we fully expected the moon rocks to come back and tell us which one of those 3 theories was correct. And of course, the moon rocks came back and said they're all wrong. And since then, we've been trying to develop, the giant impact model, and we're having a fair amount of success with that. And we look around the solar system and we see collisions still happening today in great abundance. We look at the geologic record and we know we've been smacked about mercilessly on several occasions. So the idea of a giant impact shearing off a significant fraction of the Earth's crust and allowing it to reform in orbit still is very appealing, but it still has holes in it. So, if it's not right, you got me as far as where the moon came from. I'm hoping that we are able to finally pin down the finer details of the giant impact model, and again, better analysis of a wider array of moon rocks that we will pick up and analyze once we're back on the moon surface will help us do that. At this point in time, we've got lots of good sort of computer-based theories for the giant impact model. What I think we're lacking is a better understanding of lunar geology. And that will be one of the things that, of course, a settlement on the moon will allow us to improve upon.
No, that's just about all the questions I have for you. So, yeah.
So thank you again to Professor Delaney for joining us tonight and also for answering all of our questions. Sadly, it is time to wrap up now, so I will now hand it over to Sergiy.
Well, everyone, you have been listening to the Alan I. Carswell Observatory's weekly Teletube broadcast, the Astronomy and Astrophysics program, written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. A special thanks goes to Professor Paul Delaney for joining us tonight and giving us an intriguing and exciting talk. The host this evening had been Maheen, Matt, Arfa, Nathan, and myself, Sergiy. Make sure to leave any comments or questions in the comment section of the video and talk to us in the chat right now. All of our programs are free, but if you would like to make a donation, see our website at observatory.info.yorku.ca. You can always connect with us on Twitter with the handle @YorkObservatory and check out our website for show notes, content, updates, and contact info at observatory.info.yorku.ca. Thanks for tuning in, clear skies, and have a good night.